On today's show, we've been promising it for a long time, but Frank's back and we're going to get into some of the cap stuff and the potential scenarios. We've spent so much time talking about the head coach that now it's time to get into the player stuff, which, let's face it, is going to be pretty fascinating for this Milwaukee Bucks team.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. And alongside me from Panera Bread is the founder of BrewHoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's episode that is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. And I'm in Miami, Frank, so I already can't wait to do an ad read all about shorts because I am stinking hot here in Miami. But we appreciate the support for Locked On Bucks. As you would have noticed in the last few days, different guests, different people coming on, certainly helping me out around this time. But we appreciate the support and appreciate you, our listeners and viewers, watching right through the offseason as well, because it's going to be fascinating. But today, we want to get into some cap stuff, Frank, and talk about potential player movement. You've got... Exactly. You are rubbing your hands together because this is when you really thrive. You've got the spreadsheet on your Twitter page, which honestly is just a handy tool for Bucks fans to just come in and have a look, try and see some of the situations. But I doubt that we're going to keep this to one episode, Frank, but we're going to do our best to roll through some of the major stuff. I'll throw it to you as I normally do at this time of year, but clearly there are some bigger decisions that the Bucks have to have, and the cap situation is a little bit complicated. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe we just talk a little bit about kind of the broad strokes of the new collective bargaining agreement. I think we've talked about that a little bit. It's taken a while for kind of some of the details to begin leaking out. I've had a chance to look at I think it's about a 90-page document. It's not the full CBA, but it's basically the term sheet. And unfortunately for, fans of basketball, they've only managed to make all of this more complicated. If you thought the cap was confusing before, they've only now made it more complicated. It's in particular with a lot of the second apron, first apron rules, and some of these things that many of you have probably heard kind of alluded to. So we'll talk maybe broad strokes just about kind of what some of the intent of that was, and some of the timing, because the timing of this stuff is super important, especially for teams that are way above the tax or have been way above the tax, like the Bucks. But mostly people have been indexing on the Warriors and Clippers, but the Bucks are obviously right there as well in terms of spending. So at a high level, I'd say that the new CBA's intent is really centered on, I'd say, pressuring spending by all teams into a narrower band. So basically the first thing is trying to take those really high spending teams, again, Warriors, Clippers, the two obvious ones, but pushing, those teams that are way above the luxury tax, basically that are spending the luxury tax, doesn't matter, and trying to finally put some teeth into the penalties for doing so, right? Beyond just the dollar penalties around that. So the one obvious thing is obviously trying to ramp down spending, and effectively, I think what you'll see is over time, especially due to some of the provisions that have put in around freezing draft picks, basically not being able to make trades of first round picks 7 years out. Eventually, if you continue to spend over what's called the second apron, you basically, your first round picks get pushed to the end of the first round and frozen, all these other things. So it becomes pretty punitive from a transactional perspective. Limits on being able to send any money out, being able to aggregate salaries, things like that. So I think what you'll see is over time, that second apron, which this year will be $17.5 million over the luxury tax, that will become effectively like a hard cap for basically every team, more or less. And again, you can go, there'll be probably circumstances where teams will go over it. And I think especially in the next year or two, you'll see some teams go over it just because the penalties aren't going to be fully phased in. But for the most part, they are trying to really kind of drop the hammer on those teams that are very high spending. And then the other interesting part is that they've also made it more tenable to go a little over the tax. So it's almost like they're sort of like, we talk a lot about the, squeezing toothpaste tubes and, where money goes, things like that. It seems like they're basically sort of squeezing it from both sides. They're trying to encourage more spending at the lower end. They're trying to reduce spending at the higher end. and make it so teams are not, some teams like, Pacers, right? Like they're never going to go over the tax under any circumstance. Well, actually now they're taking away some of the incentive to always stay under that tax number. Now, unfortunately for kind of, the new provision, especially those around the first and second apron, again, they're going to make it more complicated and kind of harder to understand. I think for the purposes of this, I'm going to assume you have a general understanding of how the cap works. So again, feel free to ask questions of us in the comments or ping me on Twitter, wherever it might be. But we'll focus a lot of discussion, I think, on the impacts of those two aprons, since those are most relevant to high-paying teams. So just as a baseline, last year the Bucks spent, they had a total cap number about 179 million compared to a nominal salary cap level of about 124 million. So the tax threshold was about a little over 150. So they were almost 30 million over the tax. And all told, that resulted in tax payments of around $81 million, which is a huge number, pushed their total payroll to about 261 million. Now, I looked this up to just provide context for that. So the NFL, which obviously has a hard cap, that was at 215 million last year, and the Packers spent, I think, something like 212. So basically the Packers, for a 53-man roster or whatever, right, spent less money last year than the Bucks for a 15-man roster, to put some perspective. And the Brewers, with no salary cap, of course, they're the cheapest team in the state. They spent basically half. Yeah, they spent basically half of what the Bucks spent last year. They had $130 million payroll. So just some context of how much the Bucks spending has dramatically increased. And that literally the Bucks have, more than doubled their salaries over the past few years. And obviously the cap has gone up, but again, there's been a lot of investment. We can complain. Certainly there's been some decisions where you can say, oh, PJ Tucker, they get cheaped out. But for the most part, I mean, this is a huge amount of money being spent by the Bucks. Right. So let's talk a little bit about what these kind of aprons, what these things mean. So there was always previously an apron. It wasn't called the first apron because there was one. But basically, if you use the non-taxpayer mid-level, then basically the idea was like, okay, if you use the non-taxpayer mid-level, then you shouldn't be able to just blow through the cap, the tax, and then sign a bunch more guys and time things and play sort of these timing games. So the apron was basically a way to set a true hard cap in certain scenarios. So if you acquired a guy via sign and trade, or if you use the non-taxpayer mid-level, then you could not under any circumstance spend more than the quote unquote apron, which is generally about like 6-7 million over the luxury tax level. And people may remember when the Bucks signed Ersan Ilyasova the summer that Jabari Parker was becoming a free agent, there was talk like, oh, now the Bucks are hard capped because they used more than the taxpayer mid-level. So once you spend over the non-tax mid-level, you're using part of the full mid-level. Basically, the league says, all right, that's it. That means that you can't go over that apron amount. Now what they've done is they've kind of bifurcated that into two aprons. And so again, it's not just what the new rules are, but how they are going to be phased in. And so for the second apron, that's 17.5 million over the luxury tax level, which is assumed to be about 162 next year. So 179.5. That'll be sort of like the magic number in a lot of the calculations when we talk about the Bucks and where they are. Now, for this coming season, 23-24, really the only big penalty associated with the second apron is that if you are over that dollar amount, you cannot use the taxpayer mid-level at all. And the taxpayer mid-level has been reduced. So the regular mid-level is getting bigger. It's like, I think, about 12 million. The room mid-level is getting higher, but the taxpayer mid-level, it was 6.4 million last year. They used that on Joe Ingles. It's being dropped to only 5 million this year. So again, penalizing those teams that are very high spending, your mid-level is going down. And if you are, a cent over 179.5, you can't use in total. Again, you can't time your way out of this. But if you use that taxpayer mid-level or even a part of it, then you are hard capped at the 179.5. So it puts teams like the Bucks in positions where they have to decide, like, do they even want to use any of that? Or do they try to resign like their own free agents, things like that, like keeping Crowder, Ingles, Javon Carter, potentially paying them more than minimum contracts? That could be a more palatable option than trying to free up dollars to be able to spend a taxpayer mid-level on an outside free agent and then not being able to go over that 179.5 number under any circumstance. Because other than that, there's no immediate change. So the tax level bands, the amount of tax you pay at different amounts, that is going to get more punitive 2 years from now. But this coming year, it's the exact same. The Bucks are in the repeater tax. So for every kind of level, there's $1 more that they pay. So basically, like last year, they paid again. They were 29 million over the tax. If they had done that this year, after being in the tax for 3 straight years, they would have paid the repeater. And basically, it would have been an extra dollar for every dollar they're over. So instead of paying $81 million in taxes, they would have had to pay another $29 million in taxes. So their relative tax bill is worse this year for every dollar because they are going to be in the repeater zone. But we'll talk about kind of where they end up because of, I think where they're going to end up, and like most teams are going to try to center that second apron, their tax bill could actually be lower this year. Now, some of the other things just to keep in mind. So in 24-25, so not this year, but the year after, these kind of pick freezing rules, if you go over that second apron, those are going to start to come into play. You're not going to be able to use cash in trades at all. There's going to be restrictions on salary aggregation, so not being able to basically pool pieces together in order to make trades work. There's going to be, again, higher tax rates. If you're $10 million over the tax, there's going to be lower tax rates. If you're under $10 million over the tax, again, that's in 25, 26. So it gets progressively more punitive over the next 3 years. But this coming year, it's really just the availability of the tax for mid-level. Now, those rules are on top of the first apron rules, which the first apron is set at $7 million over the tax in this coming season. So about $169 million is that right? So again, the tax for mid-level is reduced to only $5 million. Buyout limitation. So if a guy was making more than the mid-level exception, so if there's a $15 million player, he gets bought out, you're no longer going to be able to sign that guy on the buyout market. Again, for guys that are making very little money, I think Dragic had a small contract, for instance, right? Like Dragic, that wouldn't have applied to last year. For the first apron as well, there's limitations this coming year, taking no more than 110% salary back in a trade. Again, tax pyramid levels reduced by about 25%. And so, again, just think of it this way. If you're using the non-tax mid-level, which isn't relevant for the Bucks unless Khris and Brook leave, more or less. But if you use the non-tax mid-level, about 12 million, then you get hard capped at the first apron, 169. If you use the $5 million tax mid-level, you're hard capped at the 179.5 second apron. So where are the Bucks right now? Let's kind of run through the scenario real quick. So basically they have $115 million tied in Giannis, Drew, Pat, Bobby Grayson, and Marjon Beauchamp. So that's 6 guys essentially being paid a total of $115 million. And so yes, you are nominally $19 million under the salary cap. But as I think people have probably heard us talk about before, you carry what's called cap holds that are essentially placeholders for your bird free agents and for other kind of different pieces like picks and things like that. So Khris and Brook basically, you don't have cap space, right? And even if Khris and Brook left, for instance, you have, placeholder slots, things like that. So you really can't open up meaningful cap space, even if Khris and Brook were to leave on July 1st in a scenario like that. But with 115 million, that basically means that if you want to stay under the 179.5 second apron, which I think the Bucks will try to do. I think pretty much all the teams are going to try to do that. We'll see if a team like the Warriors, for instance, can do that, the Clippers, things like that. But I think they're all going to try to do that. I think they're all probably going to tell free agents hey, we got to stay under the second apron, or, it's going to be more punitive and we got to kind of keep an eye on that, right? It's going to be a little bit of you're buying a car and they're like, oh, I got to talk to my manager. He's not going to be happy about this deal I'm giving you, right? It's going to be a little bit of some of those kind of games being played, I would expect. So in that way, even teams like the Bucks can benefit a little bit because now they have an excuse not to spend, unlimited amounts of money with the only penalty being money, although that is the only penalty for this coming season. But basically you have $64 million to spend on, call it 8 guys to fill out the roster, including Khris and Brook. So let's start with Khris, right? I think we've all agreed, right? Yes, he has a $4 million player option. Odds of him getting a new deal starting at that same level, probably minimal, right? But yes, anything can happen. But his individual max is 47 million starting. But I don't think any of us, I think we've talked about it. There's no expectation he would get close to that. The only team with cap space projected higher than 40 million are the Rockets. We've talked a little bit about them. Certainly, I think we both hope James Harden goes back to Houston and uses up most of that cap space. But the Pistons are also at 38, the Spurs at 37. Again, are those teams going to prioritize a guy like Khris given where they are And given where Khris is at the age of 31 going on 32, I don't really think so. And the other piece too, I mean, Khris has made 194 million in gross earnings throughout his career. Certainly you'd expect that whatever deal he signs here will take him above $300 million in career earnings. So he's not like a guy who, has to go for the biggest dollar amount necessarily anyway. So the obvious win-win here is for Khris to opt out, get at least 3 years, probably 4 on a new deal that starts at a number below that $40 million number. So again, Bucks have some more flexibility. They play less in taxes this year, and they commit to more money on the out years. And Bobby Marks threw out 3 for 90, like a couple month ago, whenever the heck the Bucks season ended. Is like, hey, maybe that's a market offer for Middleton. I think again, I'm placeholdering about $35 million starting salary, 4 years, 156. I'm trying to be a little conservative there. I think there's a good chance that comes under that. But again, number of variables here, different things you could do. John Horst special, you put the player option on the 4th year to incentivize him to maybe take that lower number. And yes, you'd prefer to, there's some non-guarantees in the last year or something like that. But we'll kind of see what happens. And the other thing too is the new CBA allows extensions where you can actually turn down a player option and sign a new deal that extends at a lower starting salary, but that's not going to kick in until July. So technically, Khris can't sign an extension unless he's taking the player option at 40, which, as we've talked about, really isn't a good thing for the Bucks given how high that number is. I think we've talked a little bit about Brook in the past too. Basically, Brook, because he's 35
Let me jump in,
already.
Frank. Let me jump in. We'll get back. We'll get to Brook after.
Do we have advertisements? Do we need to pay bills here, Kane?
Well, I don't think that's the way we look at it, because we just love doing it. But we are going to get to that just a bit. But Brook Lopez, we've spoken about Khris Middleton a lot. Maybe Brook Lopez is a little more interesting because certainly for me, I think I know where the value is going to be and where the money is roughly going to lie for Khris Middleton. But we perhaps didn't expect that 12 months ago we would be talking today about Brook Lopez maybe having the best season he's had in a decade, or depending on how you feel about it. So. Yeah, ever. So I find the Brook Lopez situation pretty interesting, particularly when you talk about the second apron and all those things that you've just explained to us all. So first, though, I mentioned it. Our friends at Bird Dogs, I honestly, I love it. And look, I haven't been to Miami for a while, Frank, but I have been sweating it up for the last week. But the good thing is, if you're wearing Bird Dogs shorts, you can really, really get through with the weather and feel comfortable, at least below the waist. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. I don't know if you've heard of that brand. I wouldn't worry about it. They fit way better than regular shorts, and they're made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any of the movement that you clearly need. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric, which is absolutely necessary in Florida, but also Milwaukee, by the way. It's a pretty humid place. Last time I was there in summer. So all I'm trying to say is we're heading into the warmer months here in the US. I say here in the US. And Bird Dogs is going to help you out with all the shorts you need. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. All right, Frank.
Yes, keep your pants on, Kane. Please keep your pants on.
Well, you'll notice that the camera is always above the waist, and when you're in a hotel room, it's 2023. Let's be honest, people are doing all kinds of stuff with their cameras in their attire. Maybe a little bit more professional up top. Brook Lopez, I know I'm looking at your scenario sheet here, and I can see the number you've got, but walk us through what you think a possible scenario could be with Brook Lopez, because I think you got to bring him back, but I would lie if I said that I'm not a little bit concerned about what the market might dictate.
Yeah, I mean, between now and the start of free agency, again, with the current extension rules, he could get an extension up to 3 years at about $55 million. To me, that feels like actually pretty fair. And again, I think maybe we've been, I don't know if we've been lulled into complacency with Brook a little bit. He took a deal last time that obviously ended up being great value, 4 years, 52. That was 4 years. Hard to believe that was 4 years ago, right? After his terrific first season in Milwaukee. So again, I think our assumption is that, he probably wants to stay. Giannis clearly wants him to stay. The organization, whether Adrian Griffin wants to play a more aggressive style of defense or not, I don't know how you could look at the Bucks roster and what Brook's done and meant for them and not want to keep him, given the inability to really replace him. So yeah, if they can do an extension, again, I don't think that's out of the question. I think it is actually feasible that Brook could be extended before July 1. But again, his starting salary is limited currently at 120% of his current number. So he can't start a new deal via extension above $16.7 million or so. So he can get more money if he waits until July 1 and just signs a regular free agent contract. Obviously, he'll have some suitors, whether any of the teams that have cap space would want to, give him $20 million a year. The big constraint everybody has is because he is 35 years old. The over 38 rule means he can't sign an extension or a new deal for longer than 3 years. So that does kind of probably protect anyone, protects everyone from going too long. And a guy that obviously, even though as good as he's been, yes, he is still an older player. So we've heard, I think, Houston connected, potentially being interested in Brook. Again, come on, Brook. You don't want to go to Houston. You're going to need, first off, you're definitely going to need bird dogs in Houston because Houston's insufferable in the summer. Just awful. But yeah, so I think there's a couple options. Yes, you could see an extension before July 1 in the ballpark of what I just mentioned. Or, again, maybe Brook pushes for a bigger dollar number. He's obviously also made a lot of money in his career, but this is his presumably last big payday. I kind of hesitate to say that. Brook Lopez, I hope, is immortal and continues to play until he's 45 years old, but reality would probably suggest otherwise. So yeah, maybe he signs a contract and maybe he signs a 2 or 3 year deal at $20 million. Maybe it goes down, right? Like there's different things the Bucks could do in terms of structure, or another team could try to push for that and then could be used against the Bucks from a leverage standpoint. But I think the main thing though is, when you think about kind of the big picture of how these things fit together, I've sort of been placeholdering about $52 million total between Brook and Khris. And so, we can debate, is it go 20 for Brook, 32 for Khris? Do both guys get more, less, whatever it might be, right? I've, again, been placeholding 35 for Khris, about 17 for Brook. But you can kind of shuffle that money back and forth any way you want. And then beyond that, in order to fill out the roster and stay under the second apron, basically if you have mostly minimum contracts thereafter, meaning that, you could probably pay one guy, I think like $2.7 million instead of $2 million on a minimum contract. So like, yes, if Joe Ingles was willing to take 2.7 to return as a free agent, you could do something like that, right? And stay under that second apron figure. And the flip side is that, again, if you can get the Khris Brook number lower, then you suddenly open up a little more flexibility, right? Maybe you throw Javon Carter a couple $1 million over a minimum. You give him $4 million. You give him a 1+1 or something like that, starting at a higher number than he's currently at. Jay Crowder, I don't know. Is Jay Crowder done with Milwaukee? I don't know, but they do have his bird rights, so they could re-sign him without needing to use the tax-free mid-level. Is Jay Crowder going to get more than the tax-free mid-level from somebody, $5 million? I have no idea, right? He, I think, was hoping going into last year an extension somewhere around his previous salary around $10 million. I don't know that number is going to be there for him, but we'll see, right? New coaching staff probably at least opens up the door to that a little bit. But again, some of the main variables, where do the Brook Khris numbers end up? Again, crossing my fingers, you get both of them back. I think they will both be back. And then there is obviously other things you can do too, right? The obvious thing you've talked about is, well, what about some of these other contracts on the books? Grayson Allen, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, right? Those are the kind of mid-level, mid-tier contracts. Do you trade one or potentially two of those guys in order to bring back a different type of player, or potentially a guy making slightly less money to reduce kind of your total cap envelope? That also would open up a bit more money to potentially spend on bringing some of these kind of your prior roster guys, again, principally Joe, Javon, or Jay Crowder, back on new contracts. Or and I heard people talking about yesterday with the Chris Paul potential waiver, right? We don't know if he's actually going to get waived, but there was some interest about like, okay, well, could the Bucks get Chris Paul, right? If to do that, right? Assuming Chris Brook back, if you were going to make a move for Chris Paul or anybody from another team, you would have to use the taxpayer mid-level. Let's assume it's the full $5 million. Essentially, what you do is you'd have to carve out money. Hopefully, you probably need to keep Chris and Brook under like $49-50 million total together, and then all other guys minimums, and then you could have about $5 million for a taxpayer mid-level signing that keeps you under that second apron number of 179.5. But again, then the problem is you are truly hard capped at the 179.5. If you don't sign a taxpayer mid-level guy, you can go over that number and just pay a little more in tax. You could sign, again, Joe, Jay, Javon, and it's really just a financial question of how much you're willing to spend this coming year. So that's sort of the scenario. But personally, I think it's probably more likely that, maybe you bring back Joe, maybe you bring back Javon, maybe pay them a little bit more than the minimum, for instance, and then depending on where those Chris Brook deals, maybe have some flexibility to do something else. But again, other than taxpayer mid-level, which you don't have to spend the full $5, right? You can break it up into smaller pieces as well. But if you do that, then you are triggering that hard cap number at the second apron. So the interesting thing is if you do end up right around the second apron, you'd have a total tax bill of around $54 million on being over the tax of about 17. Again, that's higher rate because of the repeater than last year, but your total payroll would actually be about $27 million lower than it was last year. You'd be at about $234 million in total payroll if they spent right up to the second apron. So that's kind of where, this is kind of in a nutshell. I know we kind of went through this fast. I think the main takeaways though are Chris Brook, where do those two end up? Again, if it's around like $50 million, a little more than $50 million, call it even 52, you can fill out your roster and stay under that second apron and kind of, again, not trigger the second apron rules. But again, in this coming season, it's really just the lack of a taxpayer mid-level, which if you spend up to 179.5, you can't use anyway because you're already at that figure. So I think that's the main thing. A lot of people, I think, understandably are saying like, man, this is terrible for, these new rules are terrible for a team like the Bucks. Absolutely. They are not helpful, right, to like keeping together, especially some of the role players that you had last year. But there's no reason you can't keep the core together. There's no reason that, Bill Simmons was making something, they can't keep Brook Lopez. And it's like, well, I think he was basing that assumption that Khris Middleton would opt into the $40 million player option, which again, we don't think is going to happen. And secondly, that Brook Lopez will get $20 million. Maybe he does, right? But even so, if it's just for this coming season, the Bucks can go over even that second apron, and it's there's no spontaneous combustion that's going to happen around that. So, Kane, as I've kind of rattled through that very quickly, any, I guess, obvious questions that we haven't hit on, anything that seems extremely unclear, because I know this stuff is very technical from a CBA perspective. You may have been just thinking about bird dogs while I was rattling on here. But anything that jumps out to you in terms of some of the decisions the Bucks have to make in terms of taxpayer mid-level, re-signing some of their own guys, what's sort of your feeling here as we move to within a few weeks of the start of free agency?
Yeah, the numbers are relatively clear in terms of where we think the Bucks are either going to be over or under. They're going to have to make decisions, and people and the listeners will absolutely disagree with the numbers that we throw out there of potential contracts or what they actually want to spend anyway. So I think we're obviously going to have to do another podcast and come back and see what the people want to hear. We've discussed it enough, and that I feel pretty good about where they're at or what might happen this offseason. But I think that's the best thing for the listeners to throw in their questions. What didn't make sense? What is annoying to you? What do you want to see happen? Throw them all in the YouTube comments or Twitter, as Frank pointed to. Hit Frank up or myself, and we can get back to those. The last thing I want to finish this show off with today, though, is that we have had some breaking Bucks news during this podcast. I don't know whether you've seen it yet, Frank, but I'm going to get to that next as you get on Twitter and start to scroll through. But first, eBay Motors, our friends, that have been sponsoring the podcast for a while now. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you fit parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you'll get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So we never podcast in the morning, Frank. Let's just be honest about this, but we are doing it today. And I did see the notification come up from Shams Charania and Eric Name, obviously involved in this report here from The Athletic regarding Khris Middleton. And at the back end of the season, we discussed surgery. Who was going to have surgery? Is Giannis going to go in for some surgery that we've heard absolutely nothing about? But perhaps not in absolutely shocking news. Khris Middleton has undergone right knee surgery at the end of the season. It says Middleton is expected to fully recover from the minor arthroscopic procedure, and he should be back on the court in July. Per sources, the cleanup procedure to his right knee was planned and scheduled prior to the season coming to a close. Now, Frank, I can absolutely understand that people are going to fly off the handle here and go, yep, he's cooked, he's washed, he can't get a contract. But I think it was clear right through this season that when Khris tried to come back the first time, he wasn't 100% right. There were still things bothering him through the season. And as the story says, this was planned from the start. And I imagine the Bucks got to a position, and I'm just guessing, but I imagine the Bucks got to a position where it's like, look, you're playing with some soreness, but there's nothing we can do about this right now. We're on the road to the postseason. He didn't come back until late February. Let's get this cleaned up and fixed up in the offseason. So to me, anyway, my first reaction, like it's not a surprise. It's definitely noteworthy, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think right around the All-Star break, I'd at least heard like whispers about, could there be some, you guys might recall, this is when Khris missed, I think it was the Bulls game right before the All-Star break. And, there was some questions about like, how's that knee doing? I forget which game it was. He came down kind of awkwardly on the knee in that game and then sat out. So I think it's notable, right? It's always notable when a guy at his age, that right knee is the one that he originally injured in college, and is the knee that sort of, he talked with Eric about it, I think last year. It was a knee that like kind of, he always had some issues kind of ramping up over the summer, but, typically was able to always kind of get it to where it needed to be and manage it during season. So it never, really was something we heard much about throughout his career. The left knee was the one that he actually injured the MCL in against Chicago. So two separate knees, two separate issues. This is not the knee that he hurt against the Bulls. This is, I'm not saying this is better or worse, but that is the knee that, he had the injury on way back in the day. And yes, I think from what we heard during the season, it seemed like this was always a possibility that there would be a, quote unquote cleanup. Obviously better to have it be, a cleanup than, a major repair to, a ligament, microfracture surgery, whatever it might be, right? The kinds of things that people really struggle to come back from. But again, is that the kind of thing that gives another team pause, the Bucks pause? I would say that the timing here is important too. The fact that this is not, now they just realize that he needs the surgery. All the reporting that we've been hearing about everybody assuming that, Khris is going to come back to Milwaukee. This has obviously been baked into that, right? Because the Bucks knew this was going to happen, and we'll see. So I think probably the other key piece there is the fact that he's expected back on the court in July. It always makes me nervous, Kane, when I hear people say like, "Oh yeah, he should be ready for hopefully around the start of the season," because then it's just like anytime I hear that, I'm just like, he should be ready by the time the camp starts. It's like, nah, he's not. And sure enough, we saw that last year, right, with the wrist surgery. I think it was originally, keep me honest here, I don't know if you remember, but it was a similar thing. I was like, oh, he should be ready around the start of the season. And then, shit happens and, you get trouble with the knee and all these other things. So absolutely something to monitor. I would expect, again, that this kind of stuff will be baked into whatever contract he does sign. I don't know if it's a positive that his contract might be lower because of a knee injury, because I'd rather he just not have any knee injuries.
Yes.
And he get, he's just a guy that you can assume is going to play 75 games a year, which for a large stretch of his career, he was that kind of guy. But yeah, I mean, again, Kane, you get old, stuff starts to kind of happen. Knees start to creak. You know that as well as anyone. So just something worth monitoring. And yeah, glad it happened right after the season and not like the wrist injury, which I think surgery last year didn't happen until like July, which, you kind of look back on, you're like, man, it would have been nice if that had happened right after the season or right after he'd hurt his left knee, so that there wasn't quite the same rehab process around the wrist last year. But yeah, we'll see. I think when the hopefully when the new contract is signed with Khris in Milwaukee, we'll probably be able to judge how much, this may have impacted the total dollar amount. But as you said, not a shock. And the fact that this happened right after the regular season, obviously, I'd say is probably a good thing, because it tells you that, wasn't surprised. He wasn't trying to do stuff and then had to have the surgery because of, issues that are brand new. But it is what it is. And hopefully we don't spend a lot of time next year talking about Khris Middleton's knees. That's one of my big wishes for the 22-24 season.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it was a pickleball incident early in the offseason. I think this is one that we can take back to the basketball season. And yeah, I agree with you. And one thing to keep in mind, back in July, so just getting him ready for a 36-minute a night performance for Team USA at the FIBA World Cup, just to really warm up to the NBA season. I don't think the World Cup's going to be on the cards for Khris there. And I think Bucks fans will be happy with that, assuming that he is back in Milwaukee. But as I said right at the top, lots of numbers today, lots of stuff regarding the salary cap. So, if there are questions, follow up, because the next few weeks, this is what this is going to be about, different scenarios. We'll probably have podcasts specific to certain players, get some different voices on and just roll through that, because let's face it, the fans get pretty passionate at this time of year with what the Bucks should or shouldn't do regarding the roster. And it's one of the more interesting off seasons the Bucks have had in quite a while when it comes to contractual stuff and where they're at with the new head coach as well. So we're going to continue to roll through it all. Go on.
One more comment, Kane. I think that, again, the very glass half full kind of view of this as well would be, we talked about it, especially with Chris's defense, right? I mean, the offense, again, not like anybody was happy with the way the Bucks executed down stretchy games, especially in the last two against Miami. But, overall, Khris, 24 points on 60% true shooting. I mean, the offense actually was shockingly good from him in that first round playoff series. I think the defense obviously was the bigger concern, and his mobility. And so, again, it's June. Let's be optimistic. And hopefully some of that might have been related to just some discomfort from the knee that, again, knock on any wood objects you can find, may be in a better spot, having had surgery and having had a full summer to rest up. So we'll see. And by the way, other trivia thing I was looking at last year, playoffs plus regular season, the fewest minutes Giannis has played since his rookie year in the NBA. So obviously they've had some very long seasons, especially around the bubble, and then the following year when they win the championship, coming off the short off season. But with a second round exit and a first round exit, and Giannis obviously missing a lot of games, and obviously Khris missing a lot of games. I mean, for better or worse, I haven't actually played that much basketball the last 2 years relative to prior years. So hopefully that kind of helps all these guys recharge, refresh, and be ready for what will hopefully be a much longer season next year.
Yeah. Well, I did mention the World Cup. Last year we had Eurobasket, those types of things. Those are the things that eat into that off-season time, unfortunately, particularly when you've got someone like Giannis who always wants to be playing. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. Like I mentioned, let us know what you think about everything we've discussed on today's show, and we'll have something for you tomorrow.